Gabriel Axel, and I am a journeyman Kundalini Awakening Process instructor, and I've been practicing KAP for a number of years. I think I started in 2011 under the instruction of Teo Semko, and basically my background is essentially neuroscience. I got into consciousness through the brain earlier on in biology, and then I became curious about questions revolving around our felt experience, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of sort of was born a scientist in a way, you could say. And eventually I realized that not all the answers to consciousness were in a laboratory or in sort of lab wetware or computer wetware, software, hardware, et cetera. So I became interested in meditation and sort of non-ordinary consciousness, so to speak. And I started to meditate, do yoga, et cetera, found teachers and started like ravenously imbibing any information I could about transformative experiences, et cetera. And it wasn't too long before I found KAP, and KAP really has done quite a lot for me. And I'll speak a lot about KAP during this call in terms of my perspective. It's, for me personally, KAP has done several things. I think it's notable to mention that I was also experiencing depressive tendencies earlier in my life, and some of the basic tools in KAP, even the ones that Dr. Glenn Morris has talked about openly in his books. Dr. Glenn Morris is the founder of KAP. Those techniques have just helped me to get the emotional force or emotional capacitance to be able to lift myself up and integrate that in different parts of my mind, my body, and my emotions. So I thank KAP a lot for that. Also, KAP gave me a very rigorous framework that I could apply sort of a scientific mindset to. And it's not only really something that's only valuable for people with that kind of mindset. It just, for me, it worked a lot because I could really test things out. I have these techniques and these methods that weren't cloaked in the sort of cultural baggage or the cultural mandala of religious ideology or dogma, all of which has its purpose. But in KAP, I really found that I was attracted to the very streamlined, very sort of zip-filed techniques that you could just apply. And KAP is really something that it's like a driver's manual, right? So it's not the driving itself. It's something that when you apply to yourself, you just become more of you. So it's not like you become a KAPper or a KAP, and that's all, a KAP enthusiast, a KAP path walker, and that's all you know. It becomes really something that's infused into your being. And I would say that because the techniques that Dr. Morris laid out are distillations from the world's wisdom traditions into a syncretic system that really targets the arising, awakening, smoothing, stabilization of Kundalini, or what's traditionally called Kundalini in the body and the mind. So basically, it's a system that prioritizes Tantric Hatha yoga and alchemical qigong and meditative techniques to help arouse the sort of vital energy in the body and help it go up through the body and back down and out. Okay, so the components of KAP 1 essentially are chi cultivation and circulation, so chi or prana or the bioenergy in the body, and elemental internal alchemy, so using sort of the metaphors of the elements, earth, water, fire, air, and space / ether, to really think about the mind and the body in those metaphors and start to play internally in your experience with combining those elements into and out of each other and seeing what you get. So this is not necessarily what I'm talking about in terms of, or this is not what you would hear about in terms of charlatan alchemy from the medieval ages where people are trying to turn lead into gold. This is internal alchemy, which is just basically taking one thing, mixing with another, mixing it to get something else. So it's quite straightforward, but it's very experimental and very intuitive. So you go through it at your own pace and in a way that works for you. So besides those couple things, the internal alchemy and the chi cultivation, there's emotional amplification. So this is actually, I find, one of the key components of KAP, and one of the things that prevents your own internal spiritual process from becoming something that is that turns into the yogi cave dweller that can't integrate with the world. And this component is the emotional amplification, which is basically learning to harness your sort of neuroendocrine responses and associate them with certain emotions and certain triggers in the external world that are in your memory or presently in your environment, and then slowly turning them into something that you can just spontaneously emerge from as you. So your experience of joy or love, for example, and really practicing that and integrating that with chi and elemental alchemy, so that you develop like a cocktail in your body of something that's very much you, right? And you kind of experience your own development happening organically. The reason I keep coming back to this concept of KAP is you or becomes you or you become KAP, I mean that in quite an ordinary way, because a lot of religious ideologies have a sort of system or belief structure that you have to adhere to. Whereas in KAP, I find that you can take KAP and sort of integrate it with your existing practices and use that to balance out the stuff that's not quite balanced. And so you don't have this cultural baggage that kind of maybe gets in the way, or you think you want to get somewhere, or you build this idea of transcending your ego that then dissociates you from your own development. KAP is kind of like you get in the inside and kind of emerge from there. So it's quite, I found it easier to tell what's happening for real versus what's not. KAP is kind of that self-science approach, which I really appreciate. There is also some basic qi healing and basic Taoist elemental qigong organ qigong in KAP. That's kind of added bonuses into the system that really help with sort of integrating the emotions and that are related to different organs in the body according to Taoist philosophy. And one of the things that I love about KAP as well is that there is a focus on self-sovereignty. So this kind of relates to what I was saying before, that a lot of spiritual systems kind of make it, in a way, I find it harder to find yourself and grow from yourself. Whereas when you have a sovereign approach, you kind of have like a boundary that you know what's yours and what isn't yours, while still being able to merge and emerge as the interdependent aggregate nature of reality within yourself. So KAP starts with focusing on the body and using chi cultivation. And then further in the KAP curriculum, you have Jing cultivation and Shen cultivation. So that's physicalized essence in the body. So your more dense structures in the body, such as fluids and bones and organs, etc. And then Shen is the more kind of rarefied consciousness that once you've kind of have Kundalini as Shakti or as electrical current or kind of effervescence running in the body, you can then emerge as sort of Shen consciousness or explore bliss emptiness consciousness. And eventually KAP also takes you to non-dual awareness if you can sustain those practices. So it's kind of a system that's a condensed version of a lot of the major milestones or attainments in different spiritual or world wisdom traditions. So it's without all that baggage. So I quite love that aspect of it. And one of the important things is it's very playful. So in the beginning, you do start just doing the practices, but one of the amazing things is that after a while, it's something that you can do while you're walking, while you're in your daily life. It's something that is fully integratable, scalar, modular, and transposable between different elements of your life. One of my earlier teachers many years ago said that, he kind of questioned me, or not questioned me, kind of posed the question to me of, is true spiritual development something that you need to kind of get away from some aspect of your life to do, or the world? Do you have to renounce the world truly, like in an external kind of cliche fashion? Or is this something you can integrate? Is this something that anyone can do from all walks of life? And KAP has allowed me to do that. So in the beginning, you do these concerted practices, and ideally you keep doing that as you progress through the courses and your own practice. But in the end, it's something that you carry with you. So I find it very real and tangible, and I know it's there and with me. So the last thing I'll say about that aspect of self-integration is that Kundalini as Shakti tends to amplify some prominent aspects of you as your ego personality. That also starts to rewire the channels in the body, and it speeds up some of the potentialities that are queued up in your own development. So it kind of takes the stuff that you're already consisting of, your constitution, and by awakening Kundalini, it sort of induces sort of this, I wouldn't say automatic process, but your body, to achieve homeostasis and equilibrium, it takes that Kundalini current that's running through and it learns to kind of optimize the flow of chi in the body and optimize the energetic pathways. So I would say you become more efficient in the things that you normally want to do as yourself without needing to sort of take a retreat and go away from the world. It's something you can fully integrate. So there are many things I could say as well. I will say something about Kundalini in general. I had this as a sample a question in one of the documents that I uploaded into my event, if you saw that. Basically, it's what if I already have a Kundalini? What if I've already awakened Kundalini? Why do I need to go through a Kundalini awakening process? Well, the name KAP suggests that it's not just a Kundalini awakening event. It's actually a process that grows organically over time. So you might have an event, you might have had some kriyas, you might have had some potential phenomena that arise from that, such as, momentary psychosis or some other phenomena that you were like, oh, this is the only way I could find out about this is to do some research. And then you find out that it's something people call Kundalini. And the process, though, is much more than this event, than these little phenomenon events. The process is really something that becomes more about management. How do you manage this in your body? Is it just like an alien feeling that you have and you activated it once and it produced a memory and that's all it's good for? Does it produce some increased intuition and that's it? Or can you keep integrating it with your development and all aspects of your being so that it becomes sort of just your life practice, a life process? So yeah, I'd like to open up the floor for questions. If you want to type anything in, I think I see something here already from Nick Phillips. Does KAP draw from Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine or TCM? Yes, it does. A lot of the KAP stuff is drawing from TCM. It's not a TCM system, but TCM draws a lot from Taoist practices, and Taoist practices form a part of KAP, and they basically inform the KAP structure. So Dr. Morris basically compiled sort of essential practices from various systems, from Hindu systems, tantric systems, right, and Taoist systems and others, and Buddhist, and basically put them together into a syncretic package that develops a skill set that is sufficient and well beyond what you might need for Kundalini awakening and development. In terms of Ayurveda, I've heard my senior instructor Teo talk a lot about this. I'm personally a fan of these things. I explore a lot of Hindu and Tantric Hatha Yoga practices on my own, and this is very commensurate with a lot of the Ayurvedic views and practices. So also a lot of the phenomena that emerge during your Kundalini process will necessitate little fixes and tune-ups. So if your Kundalini went one way, or it kind of made a certain phenomena in your particular constitution emerge, you might be able to borrow from, whether it's Tibetan medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, and conventional medicine, depending on what the needs are and what you're going through. So that's very individually dependent. Gabriel from John Kennedy, Gabriel, could you tell me about particular enhancements you have seen in the normal regular activities in your life attributable to KAP, emphasis on regular activities? Yeah, so my interaction with people has gotten a lot better because of the emotional cultivation that I have worked on with KAP. So the emotional cultivation works basic emotions you use in everyday life and that you may or may not even use. You may be a very confident person, but you may not experience a lot of love, or vice versa. So with KAP, you learn to balance that out. And I have found that it allows me to really integrate myself and develop in the social fabric much more than I used to. I used to be quite a shy person, I'd say. I still get nervous about certain things, but that shyness, I've been able to confront it, because what happens is that when you have these emotional cultivation techniques at hand, and you start to amplify this and circulate it and integrate it into your body, so you have a nice cocktail of hormones running all the time, then when you encounter a difficult or challenging experience, your mind is less likely to identify and associate with that negative experience. It's more likely to say, wait, I'm not all of that. I still have all these sort of networks of positive emotions that I can sort of lean on and draw from to deal with this challenging circumstance. So in regular activities where I experience a challenge or a stressful day at work, I can employ some of the grounding techniques in KAP. I can employ some of the confidence gaining techniques in KAP and learn to integrate that and circulate that so that my stress goes down and I'm able to function more properly. So KAP sort of affords you a form of metacognition, which is like thinking about thinking or forming strategies. You're better able to notice when the normal things that would normally afflict you and challenge you, when they're bringing you down, you can notice them more quickly and sort of, work your way out of it or through it. So can you still receive the benefit of KAP if you're not doing the more 40-minute practice every day? Yes. KAP is really amenable to micro practices, mini practices, ultra short practices. So there's various techniques, and at particular times of the day, you can segment that however you want. The 40 minutes is sort of the recommended amount to really get yourself familiar with the way it feels, to sort of start rewiring your nervous system according to the practices. And it's very valuable to immerse yourself. If you've ever done a Vipassana retreat, for example, the feeling of just, it's different because you've been in that for so long, as opposed to sitting down for a 20-minute meditation. Having said that, KAP is perfect for the householder. I do KAP on my bathroom breaks or my walk through the forest when I go on my lunch break at work. And that's just 10 minutes or sometimes less, sometimes a little bit more. I also do KAP when I'm walking to my car or walking to a meeting. So it's of course, if you're doing some aspects of KAP involve some movement, right? So KAP is an adaptable system that you can incorporate into your existing movement paradigms, whether that be asana or qigong or martial arts. That said, the basic core technique, you can do sort of overt versions of them where you're very visibly looking like a psychiatric patient, or you can do a version that is more hidden, kind of more subtle, where if you're waiting at a bus stop, no one really notices. They might just think you're zoned out, or maybe you're not zoned out. Maybe you're talking with them and you're doing the emotional cultivation also. So yeah, from Klaus, some questions from Adam via Facebook. Has Gabriel published any research on this so far? If so, where? How has the science focus made the practice more efficient? Are there any intro materials, et cetera, et cetera? And then a question about a Taoist practice that I'll answer in a second. So number one, have I published any research on this so far? No. The subject of my PhD, which I'm almost done with, is non-ordinary consciousness and how that's processed by the brain and how the brain also processes bodily self-consciousness. So I published on that, and I published some work on artificial intelligence, which I'm also working on. And KAP has been on the to-do list. It's tricky when you go into academia and you'd say, I'm going to do research on Kundalini. You have to draw a link between research that already exists. And Kundalini is not the easiest phenomenon to study. There are lab tests by, for example, Teo Semko. I remember him telling him one of his students was doing one of the KAP techniques every day, and she saw changes in her bone density, which could be proven through lab tests. So little things like that you can piece out, you can talk about. But if you want to talk about Kundalini in general, that's maybe not the best of a neuroscience degree just yet, and maybe more of an anthropological degree. So I'm doing a neuroscience degree, so I've chosen to not study KAP during my neuroscience, just finish a PhD and then really start doing that more esoteric stuff after. And you can find my existing work on my website under the academic section. So that would be, I'll type it in. It's just gabrielaxel.com/academic. And there's more coming as well. Are there any intro materials online that I can play with? Very interested to see what intersections might exist with my own Qigong practice. Yes, so there is a YouTube channel called KAP Vids. I can find a link and put it in there, or I can message it to everybody after. But there are some videos by senior instructor Teo Semko, and they're not really practice materials, but they're more about like general Q&As on KAP. So if you're interested in Kundalini phenomena and what they may not mean, such as ideas about, you know, retaining semen and if that affects Kundalini, what happens if your Kundalini is stuck at this area or that area, all those kinds of things you can learn more about. In terms of the actual intro material, the best source is Dr. Glenn Morris's books. Path Notes of an American Ninja Master is a very awesome book. I highly recommend it. You know, you may have read some really interesting stuff in your life, but reading directly from the source, Dr. Morris, you get an idea of where he's coming from, where the system was developed from, and his perspective. You might be interested in Chagar Tong Long Chuen as taught by Sigong Nig CK. Sorry for my pronunciation. Maybe Nick could help with that. He shows the external benefits of their high-level practice, drawing up the testicles into the body. While I am just a beginner in this particular style, my understanding is that the internal benefits are profound as well. Yeah, so things like drawing up the testicles into the body, you could say that falls in the category of Jing Gong as opposed to Qi Gong or Shen Gong or Chao Gong and all these, you know, terminologies. So that is Jing Gong, and that is taught mostly in KAP 2, the second course. The second course is really just plug-in methods to the first course. KAP 1 is really all you need for your life to kind of safely arouse and awaken and stabilize, integrate, smooth Kundalini in your body. And I think that that's really enough. I practice with KAP 1. I purposely refuse to take KAP 2 until I practiced KAP 1 for a long time and worked through a lot of crap that was in my system. And that proved worth it. I just worked on those methods, and then I finally jumped on KAP 2, and it was very easy to plug those extra methods in to the existing KAP 1 practice. So yeah, KAP 2 does work a bit on that Jing Gong stuff. KAP 2 doesn't necessarily really work by teaching you internal martial arts explicitly. One of the senior instructors, Santiago Dobles, is really into that. He practices Penchak Sila, and I've studied it with him under that system, and he's fantastic at it. If you're ever in Miami, Florida, I highly recommend attending one of his classes. But yeah, the basic internal benefits you can get from KAP 2. And then if you want to go all the way, you can do iron shirt Qigong, and you can self-flagellate yourself with metal rods and see if you can tolerate the sensations. Yes, I wonder, should KAP be integrated with other practices like one's normal yoga practice, one's regular meditation practice? Absolutely. Just have a understanding of what the KAP technique is, so you don't in your mind accidentally distort it and say, oh yeah, well, this emotion is actually that, and this chakra is actually this or that, and you start mixing it. There's a lot of you know, hodgepodgery in the sort of yoga and spiritual community. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, etc., which is fine, but just have a kind of self-science mindset. Know what is coming from what and where, and integrate it and see what works, so you can decide. And you can also transmit that to your students if you're a yoga teacher, or just your peers if you're just interacting in day-to-day life. So yes, you can integrate it with other practices. It's a whole different story if you want to develop like your own custom system. That's you know, that's totally the discretion of like the senior instructors. The issue with KAP is that if you start teaching components to people and they have a Kundalini process, if you don't have an instructor that has gone through a full ascent and descent and some lateral expansion of Kundalini, then they may not be able to direct that person in the appropriate directions, and that person might just, no one might know what's going on with them. They might not know. They might go to a psychiatrist and get drugged, and you know, it could get messy. So the KAP stuff should be done under the guidance of an instructor. And because I mentioned those couple stages, I know Klaus asked me somewhere about milestones in KAP, and major milestones are basically ascent, piercing all the chakras. A lot of Kundalini awakening happens where their Kundalini opens and they might pierce one chakra or none or some, and different combinations. But you want to ideally get it to pierce all the chakras through the bindu, or the center of each one. And the feeling of that is one of kind of having an intuitive sense, or a visceral sense even, of the origin of the feelings of those nerve plexuses and the associated senses. You kind of have a feeling of like connecting more to the bliss empty center, like a little black hole where those things come from. And then cultivating that is a whole nother story. But just piercing the chakras produces a lot of integration in the body, neuroendocrine integration, emotional, mental integration, and well-being, and a feeling of ease and balance to start with. And then once it pierces the crown, then it goes back down as bliss, emptiness, or grace. So that's kind of the dove descending, the dove imagery that you see in Catholicism, the Holy Spirit, like kind of the white light, the waterfall coming down, you know. So that's that. And then after that, there's the Nataraja Tandava, the dance, right? When you see statues of Nataraja kind of with the arms splayed out like this, dancing with the leg lifted, that's the expansion into the Dai extraordinary vessel, which is a kind of a meta meridian in Taoist metaphysics and traditional Chinese medicine. So that's expansion outward. That's in, so that Kundalini is not just this thing in your central channel, and your central channel is this big, but your central channel expands, or you sushumnify your reality more and more. So that's what that expansion is. And that's really powerful. Let's see, from Razzle Dazzle. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how this practice can and would affect someone who sometimes has quite intense Kundalini experiences and Kriyas already. Yay. So KAP works to arouse Kundalini, and the practices that make up KAP also serve to smooth out the experiences that are already occurring, right? So it's not just like, let's awaken Kundalini and off you go, good luck. It's more about let's awaken it and and stimulate it safely and smooth it out, right? So one of the practices, it involves like short-circuiting Kundalini so that it doesn't like fry your brain too much, right? So that happens, it doesn't go through someone's central channel right out the top. That could take a little while even. So it's routing around the head and driving you nuts, right? That happened to me. So I had to do a lot of certain kinds of circulation techniques, which are in KAP 1, and that helps to really smooth it out and bring it into harmonization. So for someone who has Kriyas that are, and you're trying to manage it, which surprisingly a lot of people do, and they may or may not be aware of it, this helps you to integrate it into your ego personality, which is very good. We don't shun the ego, otherwise you'll just dissociate yourself from the world, and allow you to kind of just be in greater ease with your kriyas and your phenomena, and that happens. And you'll be able to actually control your kriyas over time. You can self-induce and get kinetic Kundalini running through the body, and then you can shut it down at will, depending on what is your intention and what the point of doing that is. So let's see. From Nick Phillips, Jan Talon, founder of Skype, asserted that human psychology is next to useless for AI research. Given your research interest in non-ordinary consciousness, I imagine you must disagree. Could AGI robots one day perform KAP? Well, I wrote extensively about this in that one paper you're referring to, non-ordinary consciousness for artificial intelligence, which is down there in my publication section. That paper is worth doing its own video and blog post about, because it's quite dense. But the idea is that AI is a reality, and it could be useful to train AI to maybe value those things in humans, because that way we'll get AI to understand that these things are valuable and not just run over us. So I do think that it could be possible. It could be possible for someone that has Kundalini running to infuse that into AI as well, maybe. So yeah, that's such a very nascent and new topic. It's hard to answer with much certainty, but a very interesting topic that I'm super keen to explore. I'm actively doing so, in fact. So cool question. So let's see. I know Klaus asked some other questions. Let me just pull up the document that he
I can ask it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd asked the question about what are the signals, markers, or patterns to notice specific milestones of attainment. And you started to talk about some of those, which is great. On the flip side, are there any, how do you tell if you're having a regression or going into some kind of anti-pattern or path that maybe is something to watch out for?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that with KAP, there's kind of a self-science approach where you are taught to really, or guided, suggested to do a technique and see what its result is before you integrate it with a bunch of other things, so you kind of know what's going on. That's sort of analytical. I don't want to call it analytical because it's not. It's more of just a sensing. You just sense in before, during, and after. that cause effect knowledge helps you build up a knowledge base of your own constitution. And then by applying the KAP practice, you can sort of start telling when something is really expanded versus when it's not, and when something is going off or it's not. In the beginning, it could be tough, and that's why part of KAP is that you have contact with your instructor after the course to really see what if you're having any serious issues or if you have any questions about your phenomena you're experiencing. And I think it's important to do that. My senior instructor did that for me, and it's been and continues to do so when I need to. Less and less now, but it's really helpful to have that someone who has gone through that to kind of detect it. Because one of the issues is that there's currently no real way, at least no scientific way has been developed using instruments, physical instruments, to tell when someone has gone through Kundalini or not. People that haven't gone through Kundalini, when they're in front of someone who has, they might feel something, but they may not. It's hard to tell. But if someone has gone through Kundalini up and down, at least the ascent, you can start detecting in other people intuitively when they may or may not have gone through Kundalini. So unfortunately, I don't think there's much more of a way to kind of measure it than that at this stage. But KAP, if you keep applying the principles and you keep saying, I'm going to do what is hard for me disproportionately so I become good at everything in the system. If you practice that diligently, that provides a really nice foundation for checking and balancing yourself. In my own journey, I've had a lot of shadow experiences open up as this has happened, because Kundalini running through your system tends to accelerate or bring things out for you to see and deal with, because you're opening your channels, right? So that means more is flowing. So when you open it, then the stuff that was stuck on the side finds its way into the stream. And then before you know it, you're dealing with something that you never dealt with before. So I've had to do that plenty. The KAP techniques have helped me a lot, and also supplementary techniques. If you're open to mantras, for example, that could really help. Sometimes if, let's say, for example, in the beginning, this is not about mantras, but just in general about an experience I had a lot of energy going to my head in the very beginning before Kundalini pierced the upper chakras. And I was doing certain circulation techniques taught in KAP 1, but there's a couple ways you could do those taught in KAP 1, and you have to have a balance of both. So instead of doing the circulation one way, I did it the other way disproportionately more until I calmed down that imbalance and that feeling. So you can sort of say, do this part in KAP with a bit more of this or a bit more of that or a bit less of this or that, to kind of start balancing all that stuff out. In terms of discerning when you've gone through a regression, it's really, that's very self and experience determined and driven. I think that you have to just develop that self-science mindset to be able to tell when something's awry, and have a burning curiosity for your path. It's very typical that people take the KAP courses and do the techniques that they're comfortable with and don't do the others, or just do it casually, or then maybe they become interested later. The success rate with people who do it diligently and receive guidance from their instructor, at least 95, I think it was an estimated 95% of the people who do that have a lesser Kundalini piercing, which means the heart chakra in the Taoist terminology. I put the statistics up somewhere in one of the, I think the event or maybe the Q&A. I can send it to everybody so everyone has an idea of anecdotal estimates based on one senior instructor. Klaus, you had other questions, I think, about meditation and enlightenment and cosmic consciousness, right? Yeah, so Klaus asked, how does, go ahead.
Oh, you got it. Yeah. Well, yeah. So how does this practice fit in with meditation, path towards enlightenment, development of cosmic consciousness?
Yeah. So how does this practice, fit in with these things, enlightenment, cosmic consciousness? So my definitions of these things have changed as I've done KAP. So kind of going back to the previous question, right? How do you know when you're having aggression, etc.? Sometimes when you're really amplified and you're feeling great and you got a lot of chi going, you feel like, oh, now this is it. This is really it. But it's always like this receding horizon. Like it never really, really, really ends. And the more you learn about the attainments of other practitioners, and as you go through certain milestones in your Kundalini development, and you learn about how a certain practitioner, really advanced practitioner, did something, and you become more aware of what they actually attained, you realize that you just, there's no end. It just, so I guess to throw the question back at you is, what is enlightenment as a destination? Right? Is there a destination of enlightenment, or is enlightenment just a process with increasing horizons and vistas and new dimensions to explore? I think in my experience, the most helpful thing has been to have an inner striving that is not necessarily too rajasic or too fiery, which I've had plenty of, to turn over every stone, right? So when something's slightly feeling one way or another, you just test it and you prod it and you see what happens, and always be interested in development of consciousness. One of my one of the healers I've worked with before, John Jones, he's very good. He said once to me, do what is good for consciousness. And he said it in this way that I could feel that he wasn't just talking about do what's good for you. That's included, but do what's good for consciousness. Like really contemplate, what is consciousness? What is reality? What is the ultimate? And always have a kind of dialogue with that, like you're bouncing, echoing ideas off of that, because that deep inferential thinking, like what is that? What would that feel like in my microcosm? That's what tends to open up new potentials in different areas of your system that allow you to say, I'm going to move in that direction. So as long as you keep asking and you have that motivation, which you clearly do, just ask it in certain ways and step in that direction and experiment and see what's there. So the practice does fit in very well. KAP 1 is chi cultivation. KAP 2 is jing cultivation. KAP 3 is bliss, emptiness, consciousness, and void walking and astral stuff, if you are into that. And that becomes really wonderful, because that's when limitlessness starts to really open up in experience, and you could be physically in one place, but your consciousness could be distributed in like these hyperspatial geometries in different places, and that's really an awesome experience. That it's a new dimension. And then KAP 4 is non-dual awareness that plugs back into the other stuff. And again, only KAP 1 is really necessary. It's just about, if you become interested in those other plugins, you can put those in. So KAP 1 and 2 are really only for people that like necessarily like want to are genuine seekers and want absolute awareness, but also just want a better integration of fluidity in daily life. And then you can keep going beyond that if you want.
Yeah. So I just had a question come to me, and it relates to Ken Wilber's 4-quadrant model of the I, the we, the it, and the it's, as those kind of different domains of your experience in life. And as I understand it, this is about energy cultivation, and it also, through the process, it can reveal your samskaras or shadow aspects of your consciousness, things that previously you've been blind to, been hidden from your view, and you're starting to reveal those. And as you become present to that, sometimes that can be difficult to accept or process in a subjective space, as well as in an intersubjective space in relationships with your family or friends or colleagues. I'm just wondering if you can speak to the integration as it relates to the different quadrants as you go on that journey.
Yeah, look, Ken Wilber was an influence on my intellectual development for sure, and I'm familiar with his model and even his 8 zones beyond that as well. But his 4-quadrant model is basically subjectiveness, intersubjectivity, objectivity, and interobjectivity. So it's kind of like a way of understanding reality intellectually. Shadow, for me, I'm a very, I tend to lean towards experience as being primary in everything. I believe you can experience objectivity and experience interobjectivity beyond them as being frameworks for actual inquiry. So you can pick up shadow material from your experience, and it's up to you how to work through that. There are many different clearing techniques that could be plugged into KAP. Some of the techniques in KAP already are helpful for clearing. There are other things you can add to that to sort of like directly address shadow material. But I would say KAP is very commensurate with an all-quadrant model, because it allows you to integrate your subjective world with the objective reality. But the litmus test generally remains a something that you experience. And you can experience something via somebody else, via feedback and response. So I think that's a very deep topic you're touching on. I'd love to talk about it, but I don't want to get so much into integral world, the models of Wilbur in this call, just because I see some
Yeah.
other
Got some
questions
more
here.
questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So, is the idea to be conscious of the piercing of chakra necessary? Can it just be accepted that the chakras will open during the KAP process? Yeah, sure. The only thing is that one of the core principles of KAP is that you be aware to start with the central axis of your body. And as you become aware of the central axis of your body, where the vagus nerves run, right? This is the nerves that descend from the brain in through all the organs and like send signals in both different directions, and regulate, your autonomic nervous system. So the center of the body, not necessarily the spine, but just the vagus nerves, the core axis. One of the principles of KAP is to become aware of that. And as you practice more and more, you become more and more aware as you contemplate like the origins of feelings, sensations, elements, consciousness, and phenomena. You go more and more and more into the center. And as you go more and more into the center, and if your Kundalini is already activated or awakened, then your awareness will help to guide it with your interoceptive or kinesthetic ability through those centers. And then that will naturally happen. So you do not have to have a concept of, I'm going to pierce my chakras to practice KAP. KAP, with its own principles, will guide you through that. I guess I'm just calling a spade a spade, I'm calling it what it is. It's the piercing of the chakra that determines integration of Kundalini into your body, and then ultimately a really healthy, nice descent and bliss, emptiness, consciousness, awareness as Kundalini comes down. So, are lifestyle and dietary practices, guidelines, or restrictions relevant to KAP? Vitamin levels and nutrition, especially sleep, have profound impacts on mood and emotional intelligence. Yes, they are very relevant. Every individual has their own constitution. I generally don't like to get as KAP in the material, like into dietary ideologies, because diet is just one of those things that it's like religion and politics. Everyone will fight to the death. So I try to stay away from that. I have found that I've had to modify my diet several times in my KAP, in my Kundalini and self-development experience, because there were certain parts of my development where I felt like I had to eat a certain kind of food more than another. At the end of the day, I think that all depends on you. And I think that there are some dietary guidelines that could apply to everybody, but how everyone gets there is really an individual journey. So that's something that I would talk more individually with you about. And I'm not even, I wouldn't consider myself a nutrition expert, much less a doctor, even though I'm a neuroscientist. So, I'd be teaching KAP, not like this is the diet you should eat, although I could certainly offer some suggestions. Sensory deprivation helpful or part of KAP practices? Yes, especially in later courses where you're doing non-dual practices, like the Tibetan Dzogchen techniques. And also in the third course, there's illusory body practices, which there's a lot of low lighting condition type of stuff happening there. So you can really let your creative subconscious emerge. In KAP 1, there is a really nice meditation that you could do before going to sleep to start opening your creative subconscious. And this is one of the techniques I really underplayed in my KAP journey. I was like, oh, I don't want to do dream yoga right now. I've done that before and it's not my interest. And then later on, I became really enamored with this technique of like really opening your subconscious gates. And then you realize that your subconscious is a really important part of your experience day-to-day life. I mean, I think we all know that on paper, but to do this technique to actually access it, open it, tweak it up, and then patch it back up and wake up and then have a different kind of day after, that's an amazing realization and tool to have. And in terms of sensory deprivation, KAP in a flotation tank is one of my hobbies that I do from time to time. So once you got your KAP stuff down, feel free to go into a float tank and see how that goes. From Carl, thanks for the talk. I will need to read more into KAP as I'm only familiar with Kundalini and I'm a bit more intro than in depth. Yeah, there's plenty of stuff on my website, gabriellaxel.com/KAP KAP, or Kundalini Awakening Process.com. There's a whole Q&A there you can explore. And Ken Wilber's 4-quadrant model, awesome. Anything else? I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I can think of to discuss. Are there any other questions, especially people that are in New Zealand? If you have, anybody can ask a question, but if you're in New Zealand and have a burning question, feel free to either type it in or maybe just in your chat, you can actually click raise hand, and Klaus should be able to see that from his view. He's got the premium host account, so he can unmute you. But try to be succinct if you can, just in the interest of time. What ongoing support is available? Yeah, I think I mentioned that students can connect with the instructor for further clarification as needed. Beyond, it's kind of one of our responsibilities to make sure that your Kundalini doesn't fry you.
I've just muted you, Rani, if you wanted to ask your question. Or else...
You just unmuted me. I'm like, whoa, what's happening here? I'm allowed to talk. I'm curious about whether the KAP Kundalini Awakening Process if you would consider that to be similar or the same as like full sexual awakening, where I guess you would have like a complete feeling of union and oneness with, say, your partner or like everything that exists, and potentially are having like a natural DMT experience. So I guess I'm just interested in how if you connect this experience to like a kind of sacred sexuality experience.
Yeah, sure. So regarding your question about DMT, there are one of the sort of emotions that are cultivated in KAP has to do directly with that aspect of cosmic, which is really a DMT kind of mood experience you have when you're not on a full dose of DMT, you're just integrating it into your life. So in terms of the dual cultivation, the sexual cultivation you're referring to, or Maituna in Sanskrit or Yabyam in Tibetan, that is taught explicitly in KAP 2 course as a plug-in method for that goes into the KAP 1. So you can do a lot of the chi cultivation techniques and sharing of awareness structures with a partner or solo, right? So the KAP is done in a way where if you're a nun or a priest, you can do all this stuff on your own. But if you are someone who is has a partner or is having fun with another consensual person, then this is totally fair game. There is one specific technique in KAP 2 that's really nice called Chakra Puja. And a lot of that is very much about integrating your awareness, that of your lover, your partner, and orbiting, sharing that, co-cultivating, and doing that also yourself, and finding that that partner is also part of you in a way. So you can kind of co-cultivate together. You can co-cultivate those two polar sides of you within yourself as well. And for the Chakra Puja, there are specific postures relating to every chakra that you can do if you're doing sexual cultivation with a partner. So, and again, that's not necessary for Kundalini awakening, but it's fully commensurate and integratable with it, because a lot of people's Kundalini awakenings, especially women who typically have more prolonged orgasmic experiences, those sexual experiences will elicit Kundalini risings and awakenings a lot more, and that's something to work through. And sexuality definitely, I think, if you're sexually active, becomes a key part of your Kundalini journey, especially if you want the rest of your Kundalini development and spiritual development to integrate with your embodied sexuality, which in a lot of people remains, there's a schism between those two. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Is seeing auras a part of KAP? Yeah. So in the first KAP course, we teach some basic chi healing and aura viewing. It's very basic, but you can learn to kind of see phosphenes in your eyes, and also do certain techniques that allow you to view auras. But that's not necessarily like a key or priority part of KAP, I would say. It's something that helps you to learn to detect that stuff in yourself, and therefore becomes very useful. Klaus puts a link to DMT. Yeah. Good stuff. You can elicit DMT within yourself through certain tantric hatha yoga techniques, such as prolonged inversions and certain mantras. And I've done that myself with Teo, under Teo's instruction, and I learned that practice, and it was bloody amazing, actually. I was like, this is exactly like that time that I actually did experience DMT, and I was pretty amazed by that. So it's certainly something you can generate endogenously if you do the right practices.